So I feel like we saw kind of the early stages of this, and look, I think this is a progression, right? Like as this has unfolded more and more, we see it more and more, right? I think so. I think the very early stages of this that I can remember, apart from Zidane deploying him as a kind of a number 10 in the build-up phase, so he doesn't get pressed and that it's Cruz that drops deep. That's a separate thing almost altogether. That's like a given that's basically what Zidane has always done. But this thing of him just being like this attacking presence in the box, arriving into the penalty area, really, I remember against Sevilla last season was where really, I think that's where it kind of began, where the team needed something, and it ends up being him scoring a couple goals to win the game. And ever since then, we've seen this kind of more and more where he becomes a threat. And maybe we don't see it as much as Sergio Ramos is playing, and Sergio Ramos just takes that mantle. Whether we like it or not, a big source of Zidane's offense is going to be somebody just sprinting into the box to create numerical superiority from an unlikely position to score headers. And it has to be that way because Cristiano Ronaldo is no longer in the team to do that. So when Ronaldo was in the team, he could basically be that guy and just do that on his own because he was so freaking good at it. And that's kind of why I joked on Slack. I'm like, man, if Ronaldo was just here, he would kind of solve so many problems, obviously, because he could just be that guy to do it at an elite level. Now, that's a very simplified way of looking at it, obviously, because even with Ronaldo here in that last season, Real Madrid were 17 points behind the league, and a lot of these problems actually did exist. But, you know, with the whole Casemiro thing, like, I'm kind of with you. Like, I'm on the fence about it. On one hand, he's actually really good at it. He actually is good at getting on the end of balls. Like, it's not like we can criticize him for some of the misses of those headers, but also like him just getting on the end of those, I think a lot of players just don't even get on the end of. But here's where it breaks down for me where like if you just had Jovic in the team doing that, like that's what he does. That's what his bread and butter is, his off-ball movement and get the ability to get on the end of the stuff like that. So you could just have a more natural player doing that without Casemiro doing it from the midfield. But then if you would do that, maybe you would have to sacrifice Casemiro's role in the team if you would put an extra attacker in there. But then again, in this game, you probably wouldn't have to do that. I do think a part of this is that Zidane is just really loyal to Casemiro for a variety of reasons. One is like, look, when Zidane was a player, Claude Makélélé was what Casemiro is, right? Makélélé was this unstoppable or immovable wall that no player could get past. And part of the reason why I rate Makélélé so highly, and maybe one of the best defensive midfielders of the past 20 years, is because he had to play in this team that was like, okay, it's just you. Sorry, like it's just you. And if you get beat, then it's just old man Hierro. Maybe he can do something. And if beyond that, Casillas is going to have to pull up a save out of his ass. Makélélé was literally just pulling that thing all together by himself. Sometimes in a diamond where he's the only central midfielder in the team and all these Galacticos in front of him. And Zidane played with him and appreciated him for that reason. And as soon as Makélélé was left, that Galactico team fell apart, crumbled. It's been well documented. We talked about it. Now you fast forward, he's a manager. And he really values that Casemiro role in the team because I don't think structurally, schematically, the team is solid enough to play without him. Or it is, but I don't think Zidane has been able to figure that out on a consistent basis. So he really relies on him. And so when you have him on the field, you have to also, in a way, accommodate for him because he's not press resistant. So how do you maybe accentuate his strengths? And especially when a team is not scoring well, you kind of send him in the box. This is just kind of the way I see it. That's the way I think the thought process is behind this. I mean, look, we joked about this, but it's not really a joke at this point. We always say, like, there's been nobody like Di Stefano since Di Stefano. Casemiro is basically, today he played as center back, defense midfielder, central midfielder, attacking midfielder, and a striker, and he had 6 shots. So you tell me if Di Stefano's back or not. Positionally, that's what he's doing. Like, it is crazy to see him in this role.
Well, when you were talking about the Galacticos there and you're talking about Makélélé, it made me think, like, this this team is completely different from the Galacticos, and it's completely different from Zidane's first reign. I mean, he doesn't have Benzema, Bale, Ronaldo, Kroos, Modric all in front of Casemiro. These are these players, quite frankly, aren't at that level. We don't have attacking talent like that from either era. And so I mean, it makes you stop and think like, yes, Casemiro is vitally important, and yes, he's been one of our best players, but are are we really building the right system? Are we really getting the best out of all these players that we have and kind of utilizing their skill set to the best of their abilities? And can Zidane be the man that provides that system, or is he too reliant? Is he too stubborn to feel that this defensive midfielder is always needed and this type of player is always needed?
So before I just have like three things to wrap up like all my thoughts on this. In terms of addressing like the why, I agree with Kiyan in terms of the Makelele thing. I think Zidane was like scarred by that, and he was the one that said the thing about the Rolls Royce, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that experience just taught him that like you just need that type of player. And it's interesting to me because like like the Marcos Llorente thing is like his rep in La Liga was being a classic defensive midfielder. And it's interesting now that he's actually taken on a type of like Casemiro role with Simeone. So if Zidane wanted to use him that way, he actually could, as we've seen. But it's just, I think because of that Makelele thing, Zidane decided Casemiro is my Makelele, and it's just impossible to have success. And I will like come back to that point and like the kind of, I think the logic actually behind doing that and why it worked in my final point there. But just to like rattle off some things that Kiyan said before in terms of him saying like we need this, it's necessary. I agree, it's necessary if you're going to play in this way where you're all, no matter like whether you're starting from a transition situation or not, unless it's a direct counterattack, we always arrive to face a deep block. If we think about how Real Sociedad, even in their attacks from build up, look like counterattacks, we just don't do that. So if you're going to attack that way and always arrive at a deep block, yeah, I mean, you're going to, I guess, need to send Casemiro forward and accept the trade-offs. But what I would say is it's unnecessary not to send Casemiro forward once you're out of the situation, but go all the way back and think about how you construct your attacks. And that's where I go back to this idea of being unwilling to change the system for other players, right? So Odegaard, Jovic, maybe even Valverde, Vinicius, Asensio might thrive in a quicker, more vertical build-up system where we're creating semi-transition and we're not in open play always arriving against a deep block. But that's not acceptable, right? Zidane's not going to change it. But I'll do anything I need to do, right? Like once we arrive in the box, Casemiro has to get in, right? I'll make whatever adjustments. And it reminds me of Marwan Fellaini with Mourinho at Manchester United, where it was a constant joke, but it was actually effective in creating chances. But then the question ultimately became, okay, this is a solid tactic. It's winning Mourinho points, but is this the best use actually of his system and of his team? Because it seems like he's maximizing Fellaini, but he's not maximizing the other talented attacking players around him or whatever the other young players. So I think that's an interesting parallel because I think they've been used in very similar ways now. And then that brings me to my final point in terms of like the logic of it. I think the trade-off always made sense 95% of the time because the idea was we were doing it for defense. And we were making the trade-off because Casemiro provided defensive stability. But when you're no longer making this trade-off for defensive stability, that's where I sit on the fence, right? Because what is the argument anymore, right? Like for keeping Casemiro on the side, if it's no longer about defense, right? Because now the argument has shifted to it's about what Casemiro can do offensively. Yeah. And that's very interesting to me because to me, there's a better way, right? You change the system so that you don't need Casemiro to abandon his entire role to charge into the box. And so I don't know if I like tied it all together that well, but I think the things I mentioned there were related to kind of come to my final point about that the conversation with Casemiro has shifted. It's no longer about defense. It's about offensive trade-offs. And that's just, it's strange to me. Like we're actually in a completely different place. We're actually having a new Casemiro conversation, even though it may not feel like it.